When you think back on your childhood nightmares, what do you remember? I'll tell you what sticks in my mind to this day. I don't remember the situation. I don't remember the sounds. I don't remember the setting. But I remember the thing. I remember the paper-thin skin stretched across a massive, gangly body. The eyes were pits of darkness dripping with some type of dark liquid from the sockets. A jaw unhinged and drooping low enough to swallow my head whole. And the long fingers with too many joints wrapped around the wall corner it was speaking from. That visual still haunts me. It was so unnatural, existing in a space that made my insides twist and knot like the most complicated pretzel. What if you could capture that feeling through art? What if you were able to depict those visuals with a stunning style that you were the creator of nightmares for decades to come? Well, in that case, your name might be Stephen Gammell, possibly the most iconic horror artist for an entire generation. Before we hop into this, I wanted to say if you find yourself enjoying my content, a like and subscribe would be awesome. You don't have to, as I just appreciate you being here, but figured I would mention. Also, this video I posted on Halloween got torched for views, so just wanted to throw it in the description if you hadn't noticed it. I'm definitely going to be down in the comments chatting with y'all about this book series, so come join the conversation. Alright, that's enough for me. Let's hop into this retrospective analysis of my favorite horror illustrator, Stephen Gammell. I was a weird kid. I mean, when I was in kindergarten, I was already indoctrinated into the horror sphere with the Strange Matter series. Shameless plug, check this video out. I grew up through the elementary years with Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark, and from that, it was all out horror media for your boy. Look, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but there's an entire industry devoted to just that. Especially when you take a look at children's horror. What the frickin' heck, that is scary. Must have it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this art was usually more terrifying than the actual subject matter and writing style in the stories. This certainly works in the favor of the authors, and no more so than the iconic series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, with illustrations by Stephen Gammell. Stephen was born in 1943 and raised in Des Moines, Iowa. His father was an art editor for Consumer Magazine, so Stephen spent a lot of time around illustrations from a young age. We have a limited amount of information from the man himself, as he generally says no to interviews, but due to my incredible sleuthing skills, Stephen Gammell interview, I'm in. I was able to find a few excerpts. Quote, "My father was very encouraging. He would help me draw, supply the paper and pencils, but he would never coach me or tell me how to work. I picked up the interest on my own. My parents never pushed me." He stuck with his passion through high school and college, continuing to hone his unique style. So the 1960s roll around and he starts to pick up some commercial freelance work. During this period of time, an interest in children's book illustrations began to manifest. He grabbed his first gig helping author Ida Chittum by providing the pictures for the book A Nutty Business, published in 1973. And thus, the rock gets rolling and the momentum carries him through over 70 published works, including Song and Dance Man, which earned him the Caldecott Medal in 1989 for picture book illustration, as well as being involved in 2 other titles that received Caldecott honors. But among these, and arguably the most memorable, was his work in the classic Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's 1981. Endless love is all over the radio, Ronald Reagan is officially inaugurated into office, and a little book is published, authored by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated by our dude Stephen. In my opinion, the most lasting emotional impact given to us during that year was the introduction of the nightmare fuel of this anthology. This book held so much cultural impact, the series saw 2 more editions in 1984 and 1991. The stories in the pages were essentially a compilation of folklore retold by the author. Some of the stories are great, and some are meh, but the experience is enhanced by the haunting and honestly disgustingly beautiful artwork. These disturbing illustrations were so good at making people uneasy that a whole new chapter unfolded in the early 90s in this tale of horror art triumph. December 6th, 1991. The Seattle Times publishes an article titled, "Hair-Raising Stories for Kids Also Raises Parents' Hackles." I'll be using the names published since they are in the public article, but this is not an invitation to harass anyone. Keep in mind, this was 1991 and people's opinions can change. In October of that year, the books hit the shelves of John Muir Elementary, and let's just say they were suited toward the edgier crowd. A lot of these stories contained some pretty graphic depictions of death, murder, and violence that some of the parents in the PTA weren't keen on. One Sandy Vanderberg likely heard of the books due to a library event where the librarian at the time read some of the tales to the 6th graders. Yes, fill these young impressionable minds with the horror and macabre. Force feed them the awful and disgusting so we all may one day feast upon the non-believers. Or at least that's the vibe she's giving when she talks about the books. Her and another woman, Nancy Allen, pulled the books from the shelves and were, quote, holding them until the issue was resolved, aka withholding school property because they can't trust their own kids. Crazy to know this kind of stuff happened back then as well. They actually managed to gather a petition for the removal with over 70 signatures. Now, if you've read the books, you know as well as I do, these stories are spooky, yeah, but there's nothing in there so obscene it would inspire a child to commit acts of violence or cause severe trauma. But that didn't stop the arguments coming in saying, quote, "This is adding fuel to the fire, giving kids ideas of what to do to frighten other kids," and, quote, "There is so much violence in them, they cannot be doing our children any good." Luckily, the good guys, an opposing committee, came in with proper rational thought that basically boiled down to the idea of parents needing to have a relationship and trust with the control over their own kids, but avoid censorship for the rest. Some, or rather most, kids would not have a hard time delineating between the concepts in these books into stories to be enjoyed, rather than ideas on bullying and harassing peers. I mean, I grew up with them and I turned out fine, right? Right? But for real, it is definitely a positive, in my opinion, that the school district decided to keep the books. And the little cherry on top is that the author himself was set to be a speaker at the district's Young Authors Conference the following spring. So, if you've lived under a rock, you may be wondering what about the art elevates the stories and makes these books worth banning. Well, I'll tell you if you can just be patient for 1 second. Whether or not it was the intention of Gammell, his works dip heavily into a style known as surrealism. What started as a literary movement in the early 1900s slowly creeped its way into art during the mid-20s. A massive part about what makes this style unique has to do with the term automatism. In the perspective of artwork, this is defined as, quote, "the avoidance of conscious intention in producing works of art, especially by using mechanical techniques or subconscious associations." Or in simpler terms, just start painting and see what happens. There's a good reason this type of art is often associated as dreamlike. Most people see dreams as your subconscious just full sending it, letting the mind go where it wants to, with little to no direction. Sometimes it conjures up fantastical lands of fantasy, and sometimes, well, portals into nightmares. This is where Gammell thrives. He's mentioned in an interview that when he picks his projects, he wants to read the story first, and if his mind conjures up images, that's when he takes the gig. This clearly demonstrates he works in a surrealist space. His pieces in the Scary Story series are a beautiful amalgamation of free-flowing movement, messy yet refined, a clear feeling and emotion without a clear image. Many of the settings and subjects he paints have this uncanny nature to them, emphasizing and emboldening certain details while obfuscating others to push your focus and subconscious train of thought in a direction that you may not even be aware of. Another artistic style he uses to really grab your attention by the balls is summed up in one word: contrast, baby. Well, I mean that was 2 words, but the word you need to pay attention to is contrast, not baby. His utilization of high contrast black and white shades allows him to pull your attention to what's important. A high contrast image is far more likely to create a sense of importance and drama. He manages to twist this technique to hide concerning details in the shadows while giving a clear picture of what the main antagonist is. Sometimes the illustration is even designed to eliminate as much information about the threat as possible, taking dread and shoving it forcefully into your slimy little eye sockets. Why don't we take a look at some of the pieces that I feel really scratch that nostalgic itch and show off what this guy's capable of. Let's start with the imagery that convinced me to pop these off the shelf at the book fair in my elementary school. These three covers definitely ooze with creep factor. This cover for the second book in the series stands out compared to the other two due to a lack of color and detail. But that doesn't mean it doesn't maintain the same level of artistic integrity. In this illustration, Gammell decided to give us a setting rather than a monster. A horrifying depiction of two people holding hands walking through the rotting, cold landscape. The trees are dead, sharp, and grating, standing out from a cloudy background in a way that makes the path they're on the only safe option to traverse. Like stepping into the underbrush would cause scrapes and cuts, and makes you wonder what in the world could be living in such a harsh wilderness. In one of the trees, masked by shadow, is some type of figure. Gammell does a brilliant job of giving the thing enough form that your eyes look and see a humanoid creature, but vague enough to make your mind question if it's simply a trick of the light and jagged setting allowing your primal brain to start identifying patterns of threat that may or may not exist. If you've ever pulled your phone out and taken a picture at night without the flash, you'll get this train of thought. The blurry outlines and inability to decipher depth perception, keeping you from truly understanding if the threat is off in the distance or right in front of you. The third book is a terrifying amalgamation of three monstrous faces held together with sinew and flesh that seems to be melting away. The inclusion of the blue background helps with the contrast of the image, forcing the eye to develop a sense of depth. It looks like an ethereal trail of ectoplasm. The face on the left is also the scariest one to me. For all my Yu-Gi-Oh heads out there, looks like a polymerization of a pig and a man rotting into detritus. Also, watch this image when I show the negative. Like, good lord. I went out of order because, in my perfectly infallible opinion, the very first book has the most iconic and creepy cover. If you look up scary in the dictionary, this is what you see. Where did I get this dictionary? This is a depiction of a rotted head smoking a pipe growing out of the ground like some cursed fungus popping up in the yard of a rundown shack and cemetery. The full moon in the sky gives us a sense of midnight haunting. Already, a rundown shack and cemetery during a full moon? It's like the holy trinity of haunting iconography for a setting. And of course, the head smack dab in the middle. The use of color on this probably makes you think spooky clown, which is yet another of the world's top creepiest characters. But it can also be seen as the red around the mouth being a splash of blood from its victims, consumed, and the blue making the head stand out from everything else as something that shouldn't be there. All topped off with some criminally offensive side-eye, looking right into your soul with a clear message. I see you, and you're next. The first illustration with a story attached that really got my ruffles ruffled is associated with an early installment, What Do You Come For? In this story, an old woman sits at home and wishes she wasn't alone. Suddenly, a bunch of rotted body parts come falling down from her chimney, all merging together into a tall, gangly man who says, "He's coming for her!" Gross. Gammell chose to focus on the most visually frightening aspect of the story. The body parts falling from the fireplace. Working from the outside in, the irregularity of the bricks and large opening gives us the idea this is an old home, shaded in a way that it has years of soot stain and wear from the countless cold nights weathered by the old woman. From the chimney dangles two nasty, rotting feet. The way they're shaded there is very little definitive lining to give the appendages a concrete outline, creating a feeling of the flesh melting off the bone. There's such a foreboding presence to this. I haven't felt this much dread since I saw my wife's car pull into the driveway after I promised to do the laundry. I did not, in fact, do the laundry. This next picture is associated with the story The Haunted House, where a priest stays overnight in an old abandoned house said to be haunted. Throughout the night, a spirit of a young woman shows herself, eventually telling him to dig her body up from the basement and bury it in a proper grave. She says to take her little finger from her left hand to church the following Sunday and put it in the collection plate. On that day, the finger stuck to a man that ended up finding her killer. Now, the ghostly haunt appeared as a nasty, rotting corpse saying, quote, "Her hair was torn and tangled and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets. And she had no nose to her face." Already a creepy description, right? It couldn't possibly get any worse.
Oh,
Good God, the stringy matted hair and cracks across her skin. The dried out lips bearing crooked, decaying teeth. 2 gaping holes where the eyes used to be, and a small point of light giving the essence of haunting within the long dead visage. This is probably my second favorite illustration. It has this feeling of hopelessness, reaching out for help, but being so decrepit and startling, I want to get as far away from her as possible, even if she is asking for help. One Sunday Morning is a story from the second book, where a woman wakes up to church bells. She hurries to the church to attend the sermon without realizing it was late into the night. She realizes the people around her were all those who have previously died. The illustration shows haunting faces gradually fading into the shadows. With the contrast in this painting, he emphasized the face closest to us with disgusting detail, while as the faces get further back, their details get more murky and blurry, leaving your own mind to run with the possibilities of the ghouls around you and how many of them there truly are. The feeling of being outnumbered by malevolent forces is definitely not on my bucket list of emotions. This next one I picked less for the creep factor and more for the ability of Gammell to meld horror with humor. It was made for the story Wonderful Sausage. Oh, you wanted me to make a joke here? Y'all are sick. Get some help! The tale tells the story of a butcher who gained popularity in the community for his delicious sausage. The meat was made of pork, as well as other humans and pets around town. We have a rotting limb in this picture holding a fork with just the drippiest meatball. I love how the background is perfectly white, really focusing your attention to the absurdity of a detached arm still attempting to feed us a nasty rotted ball of meat. Even in death, the insatiable desire for this wonderful sausage is too strong. I said, get some help! Now, before I hop into the illustrations for this next book, I want to mention you can see the evolution of his art. Things gradually get darker, more detailed, and arguably far more terrifying. This is where we get some of the most iconic images of the series. Firstly, we'll take a look at the illustration for everyone's favorite scarecrow story, Harold. Harold was created by 2 boys while they were bored with their work. They named him after a farmer they hated, and over the course of weeks, they would treat the straw man like shit until the thing eventually comes to life. The 2 boys, now terrified, decide to head back into town, but realize they forgot something. One goes back to grab the item, only to be murdered and skinned by the horrifying scarecrow. This wonderful painting shows a scarecrow with features far too human, stretched, and distorted, hanging from a post in the middle of a dark field. You can see the shadows of the 2 boys looking over from the darkness, watching to see what the thing would do next. The image invokes a sense of unease and suspicion. Gammell does a great job of making the thing look too human to not be alive and too fake to be human. The use of surrealism to place the subject of this illustration firmly in the uncanny valley is fantastic. This monster will live on in infamy in the horror monster zeitgeist, so much so, it was on the poster for the film that came out in 2019. The next painting is attached to The Dream, where the protagonist has a dream of walking up a dark staircase and into a room with windows nailed shut. As she went to sleep, a woman with a pale face, black eyes, and long black hair appeared, telling her, "This is an evil place. Flee while you can." The next day on her travels, she finds a house where she's looking for a room to stay, but quickly notices the staircase and room match that of the dream. When she thinks the landlady is knocking on the door, she opens it only to find the same entity standing there. Gammell once again takes this prompt and runs squarely into the uncanny valley. Feel like I need to dance around this description. He created this large, lumbering woman. The waist-length black hair looks matted and wet, framing a face with a mouth far too wide and large, and two beady black eyes. A lack of emotion plastered across the face lends another level of creepiness, like the being is incapable of human emotion and simply exists as an oracle of danger. This is my favorite image from the books due to the ambiguity of the creature's intentions and the unsettling nature of the way it looks. The last image we're going to look at holds probably the most visceral and uncomfortable implication. The red spot tells the tale of a young woman with a large boil on her face, and one evening the boil popped. To her horror, out poured hundreds of baby spiders. This is just ugh. The illustration shows a horrified face of the girl with a black abscess on her cheek. Cracks and tears in the skin show the violence of the eruption. Blood drips down and off her chin while spiders crawl all across her face. The stretched facial structure really emphasizes the reaction. Stunned silence as she melts in horror at the insanity occurring not just right in front of her face, but on it. Stephen Gammell's use of surrealism in art is strikingly potent, blending eerie imagery with dreamlike absurdity to create unsettling and evocative scenes. His illustrations take familiar everyday elements and distort them into strange, often grotesque form, making the viewer feel both intrigued and disturbed. So much so that, as I mentioned before, it helped lead to a film that came out in 2019. The cultural significance of the book led to this outcome where the movie has seen relatively good review. I'm not going to go into the story of the movie as I probably want to make a video on it in the future, but it is clear the massive influence Gammell's art had on the monster design. This artist had his style plastered all over this thing. Gammell's art remains one of the most unsettling and memorable contributions to the world of horror. Through his use of chaotic, surreal imagery, Gammell pushed the boundaries of what could be considered children's art by introducing nightmarish visuals that conveyed deep psychological terror. His illustrations, often grotesque and distorted, left a lasting impact on a generation, instilling a sense of dread and unease that lingered long after the pages were closed. This horror imagery resonated with audiences, influencing countless other creators, changing how horror was experienced, especially for young readers. In essence, Gammell's work wasn't just terrifying, it was transformative, leaving an indelible mark on the horror genre and shaping the way future generations would come to understand fear itself. Thank you all for watching, and as always, have a terrifying evening.